Welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about gzip. And gzip, other than optimizing images, which we have talked about already, gzipping is probably the biggest and the best way to optimize performance. And luckily for us, it's really simple to implement. You see, by default, when you compress a file or a folder using the gzip command, it will have the same file name as it did before, but it now will have the extension .gz. And also, the files are going to be significantly smaller. We're simply making these files smaller. Something that we're very well aware of how that benefits performance. Now, how do we get this gzip tool? It sounds extremely useful. And it's very easy to implement. For example, in an Express app, on an Express server, all you need to do is to require the compression npm package, that is to install compression, and then use it as a middleware, app.use compression. And just by doing that, all of your content that you sent to the client is going to be gzipped. Okay, now how do we test this out? Well, by default, all modern browsers allowed gzipping. And GitHub Pages, for example, does this automatically. If we go to our RoboFriends app and I open up the network tab, in here, if I refresh my page, I see I get a ton of requests. If I click on the first document and I scroll down to response headers, I see that content encoding is gzip. If I keep scrolling down to the CSS file, I see that the content encoding is gzipped. If I do the JavaScript file, again, it's gzipped. And this is done automatically. We see that it's also served from our service worker. If I do a hard refresh, we see that our file sizes are, again, quite small. And this is all because it's gzipped. If it wasn't gzipped, this will be significantly bigger file. In most websites that you visit, if you go through here and you look at their headers of their files, most of them are gzipped. And as we saw with Express, all we need to do is run the compression npm middleware. And you can gzip pretty much everything that you send to the client. For example, here's a list of the file types that allow you to get to gzip things. You can do JSON, you can do HTML, CSS, and many other types. You pretty much should be gzipping everything. And if you're not, then you have to ask yourself, what is the reason that you're not? There's very few reasons not to use gzip. Now, you're also wondering to yourself, what about if I don't have an Express server? What if I have something like HostGator that hosts my website, or Bluehost? And most of those websites use something called Nginx or Apache Web Server. And those you can think of as a simpler Express server that are really good at just sending HTML files, CSS files, JavaScript files. And you don't have to configure anything. Bluehost and HostGator does all of that for you. And they usually have something like a configuration file. And this is a configuration file example of Nginx. All we need to do is say gzip on, and you have gzip automatically enabled. And most places, because gzip is so important for performance, have this enabled by default. But as you saw, it's very simple to check if you're using gzip. You simply go to the network tab and check to see what kind of encoding it has. Now, just a quick heads up. There's one thing that was created by Google that is actually a little bit better than gzip. And it's called Broadly. And it actually, most of the time, has 20% better compression than gzip. And websites are starting to use it more and more. Right now, the adoption isn't 100% there yet, and some browsers are still implementing default encoding by Broadly. But if you go to websites like Product Hunt, and let's say I refresh the page here. If I go to the very top, to the HTML document, and I go to the content encoding, I see that they're using BR, which is short for Broadly. So keep an eye on Broadly. It will probably surpass gzip and will become the dominant compression algorithm that will be used on websites. But either way, these two tools just absolutely improve your performance, so there's no reason not to use them. And as you saw, they're extremely easy to use. But that's it for now. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.